The jungle was alive with sounds that made men nervous. Birds screamed warnings from the canopy above while insects buzzed in thick clouds around every soldier's face. Captain Jack Morrison wiped sweat from his forehead and stared at the dense wall of green before him. Somewhere in this mess he had to build an airfield. Not in weeks or months, but in 48 hours. It was March 1943, and the Pacific War was not going well for the Allies. The Japanese military had conquered huge areas of Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. They moved fast, struck hard, and left Allied forces scrambling to respond. American and Australian troops were fighting back, but they faced a terrible problem. Without airfields, their planes could not reach the battle zones. Without planes, ground troops were sitting ducks for enemy bombers. Jack had arrived at the makeshift base camp just 3 hours ago. His boots were still caked with mud from the landing boat that brought him ashore. The camp sat on the edge of Guadalcanal, one of the Solomon Islands that had become a bloody battleground. Americans had taken the island months earlier, but the Japanese kept trying to take it back. Every night, enemy ships would shell the island. Every day, enemy planes would try to bomb it. Colonel Matthews did not waste time with pleasantries. The moment Jack entered the command tent, the older officer pointed at a map spread across a wooden table. Red marks showed enemy positions. Blue marks showed Allied positions. Between them was a lot of unmarked jungle. "Morrison, we need an airfield here," the colonel said, tapping his finger on a spot deep in the jungle interior. "Our boys are getting hammered 15 miles north. We have fighters and bombers ready to go, but they are stuck on carriers that need to stay far from enemy submarines. We need a land base, and we need it now." Jack studied the map. The location made sense strategically, but building there seemed impossible. "Sir, that area is solid jungle. The ground is probably swamp. We would need weeks just to clear the land." "You have 48 hours, Colonel Matthews said flatly. "After that, the Japanese will push through our northern line, and 2,000 men will be cut off with no way to evacuate them. Those men will die, Captain, unless you give our planes a place to land." Jack felt his stomach tighten. He had been trained as a combat engineer at Fort Belvoir in Virginia. He had studied bridge building, mine clearing, and fortification construction. But this was insane. "Sir, even with perfect conditions, building a full runway takes—" "I know what it takes under normal circumstances," the colonel interrupted. "But these are not normal circumstances. That is why we are using Marston mats." Jack had heard of Marston mats but had never seen them used in real combat conditions. They were steel planks about 10 feet long and 15 inches wide, with holes punched through them to reduce weight. Each mat weighed about 66 pounds. The genius was in how they connected. Each plank had hooks and slots on the edges that allowed them to lock together like a giant jigsaw puzzle. Once connected, they formed a solid steel runway that could handle the weight of heavy bombers. The mats were invented by James Lister at the Waterways Experiment Station in Vicksburg, Mississippi. They were named after the town of Marston, North Carolina, where they were first tested. The U.S. military had started producing them by the thousands, shipping them to every combat zone in the Pacific. In theory, they could turn any flat piece of ground into a functional airfield in days instead of months. Theory was the key word. Jack had never actually built anything with them under combat pressure. "You will have 200 men," the colonel continued. "Most of them are infantry who have been pulled off the line. They are exhausted, but they are all we can spare. You will also have 6 bulldozers, 4 supply trucks, and enough Marston mats to build a 5,000-foot runway. The mats are already being unloaded at the beach." Jack looked at the map again. 5,000 feet would be enough for fighters and medium bombers. But getting those mats 3 miles into the jungle, clearing the land, leveling the ground, and then laying all those steel planks in just 2 days? He would need a miracle. "Sir, if the Japanese spot us clearing the jungle, they will bomb the site before we finish." "That is a risk we have to take," Colonel Matthews said. His voice softened slightly. "Jack, I would not give you this job if I did not think you could do it." "You are the best engineer I have. Those men up north are counting on you, even though they do not know it yet." Jack saluted and left the tent. Outside, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky orange and red. He had 48 hours starting now. He walked to where his men were gathering. 200 faces looked at him. Some were young, barely 18. Others were older veterans with hard eyes and scars. All of them looked tired. "Listen up," Jack called out, his voice carrying across the group. "We have been given a job that nobody thinks we can do. We are going to prove them wrong. We are going to build an airfield in the middle of that jungle in 2 days. When we are done, our planes will use that runway to save 2,000 American lives. Every mat you lay, every tree you cut, every hour you work without sleep, it all matters. We start at dawn. Get some rest while you can. As the men dispersed to their tents, Jack's second-in-command approached. Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez was a stocky man from Texas who had fought in 3 major battles already. Captain, the men are already exhausted. Half of them were in combat just yesterday. I know, Jack said quietly, but what choice do we have? Rodriguez nodded slowly. None, sir. We do it or those boys up north die. Jack looked toward the dark wall of jungle. Somewhere in there they would build the impossible. The jungle did not care about their deadline. The Japanese did not care about their fatigue. But somehow they would have to make it work. The war in the Pacific was unlike anything the world had seen before. Battles were not fought in neat lines across open fields. They were fought on tiny islands covered in jungle, on beaches under machine gun fire, and in the air above vast stretches of ocean. Victory often came down to simple things like who could build an airfield faster. Tomorrow, Jack and his men would find out if steel mats and determination could beat the jungle and the clock. The jungle exploded with noise as 6 bulldozers roared to life. It was barely dawn, and the air was already thick with humidity that made every breath feel like drinking hot soup. Captain Jack Morrison stood at what would become the edge of their runway, watching his men prepare for the hardest 2 days of their lives. The bulldozers moved forward like angry beasts, their blades biting into centuries-old trees. Wood cracked and splintered. Vines as thick as a man's arm snapped like guitar strings. The jungle that had stood untouched for thousands of years was falling to American steel and determination. Jack had divided his 200 men into teams. 40 men worked with the bulldozers, using axes and saws to cut through vegetation that the machines could not handle. Another 60 men were already hauling the first loads of Marston mats from the beach. The remaining 100 were scattered along the planned runway path, pulling stumps, filling holes, and trying to create something resembling flat ground. The work was brutal. The temperature climbed past 90 degrees before the sun fully rose. Men stripped to their waists, their skin turning red under the tropical sun. They drank water constantly, but it was never enough. The jungle seemed to fight back against every cut, every cleared foot of ground. Sergeant Rodriguez walked alongside Jack, a clipboard in his hand. We have cleared about 300 feet so far, he reported. At this rate, we will need the full 48 hours just for clearing, never mind laying the mats. Jack had done the math already. We need to work faster. Double up on the bulldozers. 2 machines per section instead of spreading them out. We clear in stages, then lay mats behind us as we go. It was a risky strategy. Normally, you would clear the entire runway first, level everything perfectly, then lay the steel mats in one continuous operation. But they did not have time for normal. They would have to build as they cleared, hoping the ground underneath stayed solid enough to support the weight of aircraft. By mid-morning, they had their first crisis. One of the bulldozers hit something hard underground. The machine lurched and died with a grinding sound that made every man's heart sink. The operator climbed down, his face pale. Transmission is gone, Captain. She's dead. Jack could not afford to lose a bulldozer. He made a quick decision. Strip it for parts. If any other machine breaks down, we need spares. Everyone else, keep working. The Pacific War was teaching the American military hard lessons about logistics. Back in the United States, people imagined war as dramatic battles with tanks and planes. But the reality was that wars were won by supplies, equipment, and the men who kept everything running. Every gallon of fuel, every spare part, every box of rations had to be shipped thousands of miles across an ocean filled with enemy submarines. The Japanese understood this too. Their submarines hunted Allied supply ships constantly. In early 1943, they were winning that battle. American ships were being sunk faster than they could be replaced. Every Marston mat that had been delivered to this island represented a small victory in that hidden war. As noon approached, Jack walked the length of the cleared area. They had pushed out about 800 feet now. Men were already starting to lay the first mats. The steel planks came in bundles tied together with wire. Each mat had to be carried by 2 men because of the 66-pound weight. They would position it, then hammer special bolts through the connection points to lock it to the neighboring mat. The sound of hammers on steel rang through the jungle like a strange music. Clink, clink, clink. Over and over, Each connection point needed to be secured firmly, or the mats would shift under the weight of aircraft landing at high speeds. Private Tommy Chen, a young soldier from California, was working on his 100th mat when he looked up at Jack. "Sir, how long can we keep this pace?" "The men are dropping." Jack saw what the private meant. Several soldiers had already collapsed from heat exhaustion. They lay in the shade, being tended by medics who poured water on them and forced salt tablets down their throats. "We keep going until we are done," Jack said simply. "Take 5-minute breaks every hour. Drink water every 15 minutes. And keep moving." The day wore on. The sun became a hammer beating down on their heads. More men collapsed. The medics ran out of salt tablets and started using salt from the kitchen supplies. The bulldozers kept roaring, pushing deeper into the jungle. By mid-afternoon, they had cleared 1,500 feet. Then the spotter saw them. A young soldier positioned in a tall tree suddenly started waving frantically. Jack grabbed his binoculars and looked where the boy was pointing. 3 miles away, barely visible through the jungle canopy, he saw movement. Japanese scouts. Rodriguez appeared at Jack's elbow. "They know we are here." "Of course they do," Jack said grimly. "We are making enough noise to wake the dead. The question is how long before they send bombers." The Japanese Air Force was a serious threat in early 1943. Their Zero fighters were faster and more maneuverable than most American planes. Their bombers could strike with devastating accuracy. If they caught the construction site during daylight, with men and equipment spread out in the open, it would be a massacre. Jack made a decision that would either save them or doom them. "We work through the night." The men stared at him in disbelief. They were already exhausted. Working through the darkness would mean more injuries, more accidents, and even slower progress. But Jack had calculated the alternatives. If we stop at sunset, we will not finish in time. And if we keep working during the day tomorrow, Japanese planes will bomb us into the dirt. Our only chance is to work tonight, rest tomorrow during the day under camouflage, then finish tomorrow night. Rodriguez understood immediately. Night work means we need lights. Lights mean the Japanese will see us. "Not if we are smart about it," Jack said. He turned to his men. "We use minimal lighting. Small lanterns close to the ground, shielded on 3 sides. We work by sections. Only light up the area we are actively working on. And we rig camouflage nets over the completed sections." As the sun set, the jungle came alive with different sounds. Frogs croaked in massive choruses. Night birds called to each other. And underneath it all, the clang of hammers on steel continued. Men stumbled in the darkness, cursing as they carried heavy mats. The bulldozers moved slowly, their operators relying on spotters with flashlights to guide them. Injuries increased. One man broke his ankle stepping into a hole he could not see. Another got his hand crushed between 2 mats, but the runway grew. Foot by foot, mat by mat, the steel surface extended into the jungle. By midnight, they had completed 2,000 feet. By 3 in the morning, 2,500 feet. The men were running on determination and fear now. Fear of failure. Fear of letting down the trapped soldiers to the north. Fear of dying if Japanese bombers caught them. Jack did not sleep. He moved up and down the runway, encouraging men, helping to carry mats when teams were short-handed, making constant adjustments to the plan. His hands bled from handling the rough steel. His voice was hoarse from shouting over the noise. But he kept going because if he stopped, his men would stop. As dawn began to break on the second day, Jack counted their progress. 2,800 feet of runway completed. That meant they still had 2,200 feet to go. And they had lost 6 hours to make up for the night work. The race was far from over. The morning of the second day brought something Jack Morrison had not expected. The sky turned dark green and the wind picked up in sudden gusts that bent the tall jungle trees. Sergeant Rodriguez looked up at the sky and said one word that made Jack's heart sink. Storm. Tropical storms in the Pacific were legendary for their violence. They could appear with little warning and dump inches of rain in a matter of hours. The men who had been working through the night were just preparing to rest under camouflage nets when the first drops began to fall. Within minutes, those drops became sheets of water that turned the world into a gray blur. The construction site transformed into a nightmare. The ground that had been dusty and hard became slippery mud within minutes. The partially completed runway, with only 2,800 feet of mats locked in place, sat like an island in a growing sea of brown water. Rain hammered on the steel mats with a sound like machine gun fire. Jack had ordered the men to take cover, but there was barely any real shelter. They huddled under tarps and inside the supply trucks, watching water pour from the sky. The bulldozer sat silent and useless. Even if someone wanted to work, visibility was nearly zero. Rodriguez found Jack under a tarp near the command tent. Water ran off their helmets in streams. "Captain, we have a bigger problem than the rain. Come look at this." They ran through the downpour to where several men had gathered around opened crates of Marston mats. Private Chen was pointing at the steel planks with a confused expression. "Sir, these mats are damaged. Look at the connection points." Jack knelt down and examined the mat closely. His blood ran cold. The holes where the locking bolts were supposed to go had been deliberately filed down. The mats could still connect, but they would not hold securely. An aircraft landing on a runway made with these damaged mats would tear the whole surface apart. "How many crates are like this?" Jack demanded. "We have checked 6 crates so far," another soldier reported. "All of them have the same damage. That is about 200 mats ruined." 200 mats meant roughly 200 feet of runway they could not build. But worse than that, it meant someone had sabotaged their supplies. Jack's mind raced. The mats had been unloaded from the supply ship 2 days ago. They had been sitting on the beach under guard. Then they were transported here to the jungle site. Somewhere in that chain, someone had intentionally damaged them. Rodriguez understood what Jack was thinking. "We have a spy, sir. Someone working for the Japanese." The Pacific War was full of espionage. The Japanese military had been in the region for decades before the war started. They had recruited local people, sometimes through friendship, sometimes through threats, to gather information and commit sabotage. Every Allied base in the Pacific had to worry about spies. Jack gathered his sergeants in the command tent while rain pounded on the canvas roof. "We have damaged mats and we have a traitor. We need to deal with both problems right now. First, can we work around the damaged mats?" One sergeant, an older man named Williams, thought for a moment. "We can double up the mats in some sections. Use 2 layers instead of 1. That will make those areas stronger and use up the good mats we have left. We will have to make the runway shorter, though. Maybe 4,500 feet instead of 5,000. Jack did not like it, but it could work. 4,500 feet was enough for fighters and light bombers, though the heavier aircraft would struggle. "Do it. Start reorganizing the mats as soon as the storm lets up. Now about our spy." "I think I know who it is," Rodriguez said quietly. "We have a local man we hired as an interpreter. His name is Kenji. He is from one of the nearby villages. He has been very helpful, maybe too helpful, always asking questions about our plans, always around the supply areas." Jack felt sick. Kenji had seemed like a friendly, harmless man who wanted to help the Americans. But that was exactly how spies operated. "Where is he now?" "He volunteered to check on the supply trucks about 30 minutes ago," Rodriguez said. "I sent Private Chen to follow him just in case." They found Kenji behind one of the trucks, carefully cutting through the tarp that protected a pile of supplies. Next to him was a small radio transmitter, the kind Japanese scouts used to report Allied positions. Private Chen was holding his rifle on the man, looking both scared and angry. Kenji saw Jack and smiled, but it was not a friendly smile anymore. "Captain Morrison, I suppose my work here is done. Your runway will never be finished now. Even if you use the damaged mats, they will fail when your heavy bombers land. More Americans will die because of me." Jack felt rage rising in his chest, but he forced it down. Anger would not help now. Why would you do this?" "The Japanese came to my village 2 years ago," Kenji said calmly. "They said if we did not help them, they would kill everyone. They took my son as a guarantee of my cooperation. If I do not report your position and sabotage your supplies, they will execute him." It was a story Jack had heard before in different forms. The war created impossible choices for people caught in the middle. But understanding Kenji's reasons did not change what had to be done. "Rodriguez, take him to Colonel Matthews. He will decide what happens next. And get that radio." As they led Kenji away, Jack turned back to survey the damage. The storm was starting to ease, but they had lost 3 precious hours. They had sabotaged supplies, and they had a runway that was now going to be shorter than planned. Private Chen approached nervously. "Sir, what do we do now?" Jack looked at the young soldier's worried face and realized that everyone was watching him, waiting for him to either give up or find a way forward. The Battle of Guadalcanal, which had ended just weeks before, had been won by men who refused to quit despite terrible odds. The Marines who fought there faced disease, starvation, and constant enemy attacks, but they held the island. If they could do that, Jack and his men could finish this runway. "We adapt," Jack said firmly. "The storm is breaking. We have maybe 30 hours left. We are going to build a 4,500-foot runway with the mats we have. It will be enough. Now get everyone back to work." The rain stopped and the sun came out, turning the construction site into a steam bath. Water evaporated from the hot steel mats in rising clouds of mist. The ground was a swamp now, making every step difficult. But the men went back to work. They had to carry the good mats away from the damaged ones, reorganizing everything. They had to adjust their plans for a shorter runway. They had to work twice as hard to make up for lost time, but they did it. By noon, bulldozers were moving again, clearing the final sections of jungle. By mid-afternoon, teams were laying mats at a furious pace. The hammering sound resumed, a constant rhythm that said they were still in the fight. Jack stood at the edge of the completed section, looking at what they had built. 2,800 feet of solid steel runway, sitting in the middle of what had been impenetrable jungle just 36 hours ago. It was not enough yet, but it was proof that the impossible could be done. Rodriguez joined him, covered in mud and looking exhausted. "Captain, the men are asking about Kenji. What will happen to him?" "The colonel will decide," Jack said. "But right now we have bigger problems. We have 1 full day and 1 night left, and we still have over 1,500 feet to build." The storm had passed, but Jack knew more challenges were coming. The Japanese scouts had seen them. Enemy bombers could appear at any time. The men were reaching the limits of human endurance, and they were running out of time. 12 hours remained when Captain Jack Morrison heard the sound that made his stomach drop. It was a distant rumble that could have been thunder, but the sky was clear. Every man on the construction site stopped working and looked up. They all knew that sound. Artillery. The Japanese had found their range. Shells began falling in the jungle about a mile away. They were not hitting the runway yet, but they were getting closer. Enemy spotters were somewhere in the hills, adjusting fire, walking the artillery rounds toward the construction site. Jack made quick calculations in his mind. They had completed 3,500 feet of runway. They needed at least 4,500 feet for fighters and light bombers to land safely. That meant 1,000 more feet to go. At their current pace, they needed at least 8 more hours of work. But the artillery meant they had maybe 2 hours before shells started landing on them. Sergeant Rodriguez appeared at Jack's side, breathing hard. "Captain, the colonel is on the radio. He wants to know if we should evacuate." Jack grabbed the radio handset. Colonel Matthews's voice crackled through the speaker. "Morrison, I am seeing artillery fire near your position. What is your status?" "Sir, we are 75% complete. If we evacuate now, we lose everything. But if we stay, we are going to take casualties." There was a long pause. Jack could hear other voices in the background at the colonel's headquarters. Finally, Matthews spoke again. "Captain, I'm sending you every available man I can spare. 50 more soldiers are heading your way. They will set up defensive positions around your site and try to keep enemy ground forces back. But the artillery is your problem to solve. Can you finish the runway before they blow it to hell?" "Yes, sir," Jack said, though he was not sure if he believed it himself. "Then do it. Those pilots are in the air right now, heading toward you. They took off from the carrier 40 minutes ago. They are loaded with bombs and low on fuel. If your runway is not ready in 6 hours, they will have to ditch in the ocean. We will lose the planes and probably the pilots. Do you understand?" Jack understood perfectly. 6 hours. Not 8, not 12. 6 hours. "We will be ready, sir." He turned to his men and shouted loud enough for everyone to hear. "Listen up. We have 6 hours to finish this runway. After that, our planes start landing whether we are ready or not. I am splitting you into 2 groups. Half of you keep laying mats. The other half are going to build defensive positions. When the artillery gets too close, we all take cover. As soon as it stops, we go back to work. Any questions?" Private Chen raised his hand. "Sir, what if we do not finish in time?" Jack looked at the young soldier and saw fear in his eyes. He saw the same fear in every face around him. These were not professional engineers or construction workers. They were infantry soldiers, clerks, and cooks who had been pulled off the line and given an impossible job. They were tired, scared, and pushed beyond what anyone thought humans could endure. "Then we fail," Jack said honestly, "and men die because we were not good enough or fast enough. But I do not think that is going to happen. I think we are going to finish this runway because we have no other choice. Now move. The work resumed with desperate energy. Men carried mats at a run now, not caring about proper technique or safety. They hammered bolts with furious speed, barely checking if the connections were secure. The bulldozers pushed through the last sections of jungle, their engines screaming. Another artillery shell landed closer this time. The explosion threw dirt and shattered trees into the air. Some men dove for cover. Others kept working, ignoring the danger. Jack realized they had crossed some invisible line. They were too committed to stop now. Finishing the runway had become more important than personal safety. The defensive team dug foxholes and set up machine gun positions around the perimeter. The 50 reinforcements arrived, veterans from the Northern Front who looked at the chaos with experienced eyes. Their sergeant, a tall man named Johnson, found Jack and saluted. "Sir, we are here to keep the enemy off your back. You just focus on that runway. How close are they?" Jack asked. "Japanese infantry is about 2 miles east. They are moving slowly because of the terrain, but they will be here by nightfall. We can hold them for a while, but not forever." Jack nodded. It was one more problem in a growing list. Enemy artillery. Enemy infantry approaching. Pilots in the air running out of fuel. A runway still incomplete. And time running out with every passing second. The sun climbed toward afternoon and the heat became murderous. Men worked through it, drinking water by the gallon. The medics abandoned treating heat exhaustion cases because there were too many. They just poured water on collapsed soldiers and dragged them to the shade, then went back to help others. Another artillery shell, even closer. This one landed just 50 yards from the runway's edge. Shrapnel whistled through the air. Jack heard someone scream. A soldier went down, blood pouring from his leg. The medics ran to him while everyone else kept working. 4 hours left. 4,200 feet complete. 300 feet to go. The work had taken on a rhythm now. Carry mat. Position mat. Hammer bolts. Move to next mat. Again and again. Hands bled. Backs screamed in pain. But nobody stopped. Somewhere in the distance, small arms fire erupted. The Japanese infantry had made contact with the defensive positions. The rattle of machine guns and the crack of rifles mixed with the sound of hammers on steel. The battle had come to them. 3 hours left. 4,300 feet complete. Jack was helping carry mats now, working alongside his men. His officer's rank did not matter anymore. There was only the work and the time limit. Rodriguez worked beside him, neither man speaking. There was nothing left to say. More artillery. A shell landed on the runway itself, about 200 feet from where they were working. The explosion tore up a section of mats, sending steel planks flying like deadly frisbees. Men scattered. When the smoke cleared, they saw the damage. 20 feet of runway destroyed. "Fix it," Jack shouted. "We have spare mats. Get them replaced." A team of men ran forward with replacement mats while the others continued working on the uncompleted section. They were building and repairing at the same time now. 2 hours left. 4,400 feet complete. 100 feet to go. Private Chen dropped his hammer and stared at his hands. They were covered in blood, the skin torn from gripping rough steel for too many hours. He looked at Jack with tears in his eyes. "Sir, I cannot feel my hands anymore." Jack grabbed the young soldier's shoulders. "Then use your arms. Use your back. Use everything you have. We are almost there, son. Do not quit now." Chen picked up his hammer and went back to work. The sound of aircraft engines cut through all the other noise. Jack looked up and saw them. Dark shapes in the sky growing larger. The fighters were arriving early. They were supposed to have 2 more hours, but the pilots must have been burning fuel faster than expected. 1 hour left. 4,450 feet complete. 50 feet to go. The men saw the planes too. They worked like machines now, their exhaustion forgotten. Carry, position, hammer, carry, position, hammer. 30 minutes left. 4,475 feet complete. The lead fighter began circling overhead. Jack could imagine the pilot's frustration, looking down at an incomplete runway while his fuel gauge dropped toward empty. 15 minutes left. 4,490 feet complete. 10 feet to go. The last section. The final mats. The men moved faster than Jack thought possible. The last mats were positioned. The hammers fell like thunder. The bolts locked into place and then it was done. 4,500 feet of steel runway sitting in the middle of the jungle where nothing but trees had stood 47 hours ago. Jack grabbed the radio. Tower, this is Morrison. The runway is complete. Repeat, runway is complete. Clear to land. The lead fighter broke from its circling pattern and lined up for approach. The fighter came in fast and low, its engine sputtering. Captain Jack Morrison held his breath as the aircraft dropped toward the runway. Every man on the construction site stopped what they were doing and watched. 200 soldiers who had worked 48 hours straight stood frozen, praying that their steel runway would hold. The fighter's wheels touched down on the Marston mats with a screech of rubber. The steel surface held firm. The plane rolled down the runway, slowing, finally stopping with 100 feet to spare. The pilot popped his canopy and raised his fist in the air. A cheer went up from the construction crew that was probably heard all the way back at headquarters. But there was no time to celebrate. More planes were coming. Jack watched as the second fighter lined up for landing, then a third, then a fourth. Within 20 minutes, 12 fighters and 6 light bombers were sitting on the steel runway that had not existed 2 days ago. The pilots climbed out of their cockpits, looking amazed. A young lieutenant approached Jack, pulling off his flying helmet. "Sir, I am Lieutenant Davis. I have to tell you, we did not think this runway would be here. We were preparing to ditch in the ocean when we saw it from the air. How did you build this so fast?" Jack was too tired to answer properly. He just pointed at his men. They built it. Every one of them. Lieutenant Davis looked at the exhausted soldiers covered in mud and blood, some lying on the ground unable to move, others barely standing. "This is incredible. Back at the carrier, nobody believed it could be done." More planes were landing now. The steel mats rang with the impact of aircraft wheels. The runway that engineers said would take weeks had been completed in 48 hours. The Marston mats that skeptics said would never work in jungle conditions were proving themselves under the weight of fully loaded military aircraft. Sergeant Rodriguez appeared next to Jack. "Captain, the Japanese artillery has stopped firing. Looks like they figured out what we accomplished and gave up." Jack nodded. The enemy knew that once the airfield was operational, they had lost their advantage. American fighters could now provide air cover for ground troops. Bombers could strike enemy positions that had been safe before. The balance of power in this part of the Pacific had just shifted because of a steel runway in the jungle. Colonel Matthews arrived by jeep 30 minutes later. He walked the length of the runway, examining the Marston mats, talking to the pilots, checking on the wounded. When he reached Jack, he just shook his head in wonder. "Captain Morrison, I gave you an impossible job. I honestly did not expect you to complete it. How many casualties?" 14 wounded, sir, no dead. Most of the wounded are from exhaustion and heat stroke, not enemy fire." "You kept your men alive while building a miracle," Matthews said. "That is good leadership. The generals back in Hawaii are going to want to know every detail of how you did this. Marston mats are still new technology. Your success here is going to change how we fight this war." Jack looked down the runway at his men. Some were sleeping where they had collapsed. Others were helping medics treat the wounded. A few were already refueling and rearming the aircraft that had landed. They were still working, still doing their jobs, because that was what soldiers did. "Sir, it was not me," Jack said quietly. "It was them. Every private who carried mats until his hands bled. Every bulldozer operator who worked through the night. Every man who kept hammering when artillery was falling around him. They are the ones who built this." The colonel nodded. "Then they will all be recognized. Now get some rest, Captain. The war is not over, and we will need you and your men again soon." Over the next few hours, more aircraft arrived. By sunset, 43 planes were parked along the jungle runway. Their presence meant that American and Australian ground forces 15 miles north could finally receive air support. The rescue operation began immediately. Fighters flew cover while transport planes landed to evacuate wounded soldiers who had been trapped behind enemy lines. Private Chen found Jack as evening fell. The young soldier's hands were bandaged and he could barely stand, but he was smiling. "Sir, I heard that the transport planes already evacuated 200 men from the northern pocket. They are bringing them here." "We saved them." Jack felt emotion rising in his chest. All the pain, all the exhaustion, all the near-impossible challenges of the past 2 days suddenly felt worth it. "We did, Private. We saved them." As darkness came, Jack finally allowed himself to sit down. He sat at the edge of the runway, his back against a stack of supply crates, and looked at what they had created. The Marston mats stretched into the jungle, a ribbon of steel that represented human determination and engineering genius. The mats themselves were simple things. just perforated steel planks with clever interlocking edges. But their impact on the Pacific War would be enormous. Over the next 2 years, American forces would build hundreds of airfields using Marston mats. They would turn coral atolls, jungle islands, and muddy fields into functional air bases in days instead of months. The Japanese, who relied on slowly building permanent concrete runways, could not keep up with this flexibility. The Battle of Guadalcanal had shown that controlling air bases meant controlling territory. The side that could build and repair airfields faster would win the island-hopping campaign across the Pacific. Marston mats gave the Americans that advantage. Rodriguez sat down next to Jack, handing him a canteen of water. "Captain, I heard something interesting from one of the pilots. He said there are 2,000 more Marston mats being delivered to the island tomorrow. The generals want us to extend this runway to 6,000 feet so heavy bombers can use it." Jack laughed, though it came out more like a groan. "They are going to have to find someone else to do that. I need to sleep for about a week first." "We all do," Rodriguez agreed. "But you know what? I think we could do it if we had to. After the last 2 days, I feel like we could build anything." That was the real victory, Jack realized. Not just the physical runway, but the proof that ordinary soldiers could accomplish extraordinary things when pushed to their limits. Every man who worked on this project would carry that knowledge with them for the rest of their lives. The transport planes came back through the night, bringing more evacuated soldiers from the northern front. Each plane that landed safely was another life saved by the steel runway. By morning, over 500 men had been rescued from what would have been a death trap. One of the rescued soldiers, a grizzled sergeant with 3 weeks of beard and a bandaged arm, stopped to look at the runway as he was being loaded onto an evacuation truck. He found Jack and shook his hand. "Sir, whoever built this airfield saved my life and the lives of my whole unit. I do not know who you are, but thank you." Jack watched the truck drive away, carrying men who would have died without this runway. That thanks meant more than any medal or promotion ever could. The sun rose on a new day, the third day, and Jack stood at the beginning of the runway looking toward the end. 4,500 feet of Marston mats, locked together so securely that they could handle the weight of any aircraft in the American arsenal. The jungle had been conquered. The deadline had been met. The impossible had been done. In the decades after World War II, military historians would study the role of Marston mats in the Pacific campaign. They would calculate that these steel planks shortened the war by months, maybe years. They would interview the engineers, the pilots, and the ground crews who saw them in action. But those historians would never fully capture what it felt like to build a runway in 48 hours while artillery fell and time ran out. Jack Morrison and his men knew, though. They knew the weight of the steel. They knew the sound of hammers in the night. They knew the feeling of working past exhaustion, past pain, past the point where your body says it cannot go on. And they knew that sometimes, in the worst of wars, ordinary people create small miracles. This runway was one of those miracles. A steel miracle that saved thousands of lives and changed the course of history in the Pacific. As Jack finally walked away from the runway toward his tent, planning to sleep for at least 12 hours, he heard the sound of another aircraft landing. The hammering of metal on metal had stopped, but the sound of aircraft engines would continue day and night now. This jungle airfield would be active for the rest of the war, a lasting testament to what determined men could build when lives depended on it. The war would go on for 2 more years. There would be more battles, more islands to take, more impossible tasks to complete. But this moment, this runway, this victory would always belong to the men who refused to quit when everyone else said it could not be done.